And I remember kind of almost looking over the old guy's shoulder with his tan book, and he lifted up his head and he just said, he shouldn't be here. And he did that with a movement of his hand. And the next thing I know, I'm in the back of the ambulance. And I've got a paramedic looking down at me. And I'm looking back at her, and she said, "Are you all right, Ray?" Yeah. I said, "I'm really sorry about that." I said, "I was just on the other side there." And she looked at me and she went, "Do you go on the other side a lot, Ray?" I said, "Yeah, I come from a family of seers. It's something that, she said, "You died, you know." And I remember looking up at her thinking, She went, "Your eyes rolled in the back of your head." She leant across me and flicked an LED clock that was on the side wall of the ambulance. She said, "This clock turned to zero at the exact moment that you died." She said, "I've never seen that before." And I thought, well, all right. So I said, "Well, if you park up, I'll make you a cup of tea, and I'll tell you about being a seer."
Welcome to the show, Earth to the Other
Thank
Side.
you.
I am your host, and tonight I have the honor and privilege of speaking to Mr. Raymond O'Brien, who is a seer from a family of seers. And hopefully he's going to explain that to us so you all can understand what that means. But he had quite a few NDEs back in 2009. We're here to discuss it. Blessings, Raymond. Thank you for being
Blessings.
here.
Thank
Welcome
you.
to the show.
Thank you. Everybody's tuned in. It's very much obliged. I hope passing on my experience is going to be helpful for you.
I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will.
Thank you. In some
and on that note, Raymond, so we're going back 2009, right?
Yeah.
This one.
Yeah.
And you had several NDEs that particular day, 9 or 10 of them, if I'm not
mistaken.
9.
It was officially 9, but I believe the cat resuscitated me in the front room when I collapsed on the floor. So, we kind of called it 10.
Now, were these all individual independent experiences, or did you have a few within the 9 times that you were considered not alive?
I believe, I'm told by the crash nurse that she said, "We stopped counting at 5, Ray, but we're thinking 9, so we've resuscitated you 9 times." So wow. I remember the first resuscitation in the back of the ambulance. That was probably a really vivid one. And but in connection with your question about being a seer, I come from a family of seers from on my mother's side, and it's all kind of filtered down from Granny. But I'd actually seen my death, and I called my mother, and she was living a bit of a wayward life, to be honest with you, John. I wasn't paying attention to that internalized voice that most of us have, that intuitive voice. I was choosing to go against that, so I knew something was coming, but I wasn't expecting what did come. Right? So I spoke to my mother on a Wednesday, said I'd seen this, heard this voice, Tom was going to die, and then Sunday came, and Sunday night came, and wow, lo and behold. Yes, a very beautiful experience. The first one, terrifying. That was when I woke and realized that I was in serious trouble. Something was wrong. Please forgive me in fear of repeating myself. If anyone else who's watched any of my other videos, is that I did pick up the phone. Managed had a cordless phone. I dialed in the UK, it's 999 if you need help, and I managed to hit 2 9s, and I collapsed on the floor with the phone still in my hand. And about 2 months previous, I saved my cat's life. He was being attacked by a dog, and I beat the dog off. Cat went one way, dog ran the other. Anyway, when he came back eventually that night, he was okay, he was unharmed, but I remember pointing my finger at him saying, "Dude, you owe me one." And so there I was lying on the floor. And what brought me round,
little did you know he gave you 8 or 9.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think he did more than I needed. He was pretty generous. So he sniffed my nose, he licked my nose, and it was an incredible fishy smell off his breath, and that rasp. And that brought me round. And that was when the alarm bells were really ringing, like you're in trouble, Ray. And so I hit the last 9, and the paramedics turned up. And I sat with him for quite a while until I live in a really small town, and it kind of closes up at 9 o'clock. So off in the distance, I could hear the ambulance coming, and they got to me just before 12. And by the time they sort of came in, I was in a really rough state. And Bill was to my left. We both were sitting on the couch, and I just couldn't move. Just couldn't move. And I was a very fit guy at the time. The cycling and exercising, and I just couldn't believe I didn't move. And I looked to my right, and in came the two paramedics. They asked me to leave my front door open, so I did. And as I lay there dying, in they came. They walked me to the ambulance, and I couldn't believe how slowly I was walking, John. That was the thing that hit me the most. It was coming out of my house and being treated like somebody who maybe 100 years old, and like really struggling to comprehend things and what people were saying to me. So I walked in the back of the ambulance, and this is where the part of Raymond O'Brien as a seer comes in. I'm in the back of the ambulance, and I'm lying on the gurney, and really, really puffing and panting for air. Just couldn't breathe. They're about to pull off. The male driver was about to pull off, but the female paramedic, her name was Rebecca. She played quite an important part in saving my life. She put her back to me. I don't know whether you know, but when you're having a cardiac arrest, one of the symptoms is that you become very nauseous. So you start vomiting. So anybody out there, again, these are warning signs. If you're getting chest pains and you're starting to vomit, be very careful what's going on. At least take an aspirin if you can, just to thin the blood. And if it worsens, you know what to do. So that's this. Mine ran on for quite a while. So that's an important thing that many don't tell us, And so I'm vomiting into this bowl in the back of the ambulance, and I remember the paramedic going to me, "So what did you have for dinner tonight then?" And I said, "Well, chocolate, peanuts and raisins, and I had a bottle of cider." She said, "That's why you're not well." And I'll tell you what, John, she turned her back to me, and at that moment, and this is where the seeing side of me came in, I put my chin on my shoulder, and I remember saying, "If there's ever a time to check out, Ray, now's the time." And the next thing, I was on the other side, and I was this little tiny sexless soul that didn't have a stitch of clothing on, but I just felt incredible. I stood on this panoramic view that was in front of me. I stood, and the first thing that met me was the wind, and it passed right through me, just went back out, and then kind of did this. I haven't said this before, but it did this circle, this roundabout way, and it connected with 3 women and 2 men who were up in the distance ahead of me. But I wasn't concerned with them because I had no fear, and I had no pain. I just had this feeling of absolute bliss, is the only way that I could describe it. And the wind was like snuggling under your warmest duvet. It just felt that warm and right. It felt like it was the gatekeeper for those who were waiting to come in. And I remember standing there looking at my toes, because the grass was a really vivid green, and it felt really smooth between my toes. And as I looked down, I remember thinking to myself, "I wonder where I go." So I knew where I was. I wonder where I go to get my wings. That was a little joke that I had with myself while I stood there. And as I looked ahead, I see the 2 males and the 3 females, and I waited. I just stood there. And the first male looked at me. The first female looked at me, and there were 3 of them in a row. The second poked her head, so I've got all 3 with their heads now like poking, looking at me standing there. And I heard one woman say something to the first man, who was a younger man of the 2. She said, "Raymond's here," and he looked. And there was an old guy next to him who looked like Fred, who looked like, I was going to say Fred the Angel, but that's later in the story. He looked like Santa Claus. But he had a brown book, a brown tanned book. And I thought, the eldest guy who looked like Santa Claus is not, for some reason, not talking to me. So I made a conscious effort to move to where they were. And I remember kind of almost looking over the old guy's shoulder with his tan book, and he lifted up his head and he just said, "He shouldn't be here." And he did that with the movement of his hand. And the next thing I know, I'm in the back of the ambulance, and I've got the paramedic looking down at me, and I'm looking back at her, and she said, "Are you all right, Ray?" "Yeah." I said, "I'm really sorry about that." I said, "I was just on the other side there." And she looked at me, she went, "Do you go on the other side a lot, Ray?" I said, "Yeah, I come from a family of seers. It's something that, you know." She said, "You died, you know." And I remember looking up at her thinking, She went, "Your eyes rolled in the back of your head." And she leant across me and flicked an LED clock that was on the side wall of the ambulance. She said, "This clock turned to zero at the exact moment that you died." She said, "No, I've never seen that before." And I thought, well, all right. So I said, "Well, if you park up, I'll make you a cup of tea and I'll tell you about being a seer." You know, and that was, you know, she said, "No, you died, Ray. We can't move. We're still outside your house, and we can't move until we've resuscitated you." And off we went. We were luckily the hospital was only sort of 10 minutes away from me, and I'm bouncing along in the back of the ambulance, and I'm thinking this is all wrong. Like they got this totally wrong. It's a bad dream. Whatever it is, it's not real life. And I heard and felt the ambulance slow down. The doors crashed open. I bounced out the back, and as I was bounced out the back, I could hear them talking about what was wrong with me. They gave my age and told me that I had a cardiac arrest in the back of the ambulance and I've been resuscitated. And as they're pushing me into the crash room, into ICU, I was watching all the fluorescent lights just kind of flick over my head. And I was sort of thinking, wait until the lads hear about this one. This is something else, like, you know. It's just like, and then I get into the treatment room, and everyone's waiting, like, you know, and they're all kind of staring at me, and I can tell by the look on their faces of like, why is he in here? And because I felt all right, I felt great. I thought this is all wrong, right? You know, and you guys are going to be really foolish when you find out you got this wrong. Anyway, it all turned from that moment on, and it wasn't a pleasure anymore. It was an absolute fright night. It was horrific, absolutely horrific. Everything to feel, and I'm sure you know this, to feel your body heat dissipate is a peculiar feeling, isn't it? It was just like it was new to me, and that reluctance of and at that moment when I felt that sensation, I heard this lovely Irish voice ask me for my next of kin's telephone number, and I distinctly remember saying to her, "Stupid thing to say, am I that bad?" And she went, yeah, you are. She said, "We don't know if you're going to sort of survive this." And I'm thinking, wow. And I had the presence of mind to look at the clock. And I said, "Look, what's my mother? Like, you know, she's not well. She's got dementia. So, you know, if you are going to call her, can you only call her after I've gone? Don't call her beforehand, because she'll never get here. No one will ever get here, you know, if I'm as bad as you say." You know, so she said, "Yeah, okay. If you don't make it, that's what we'll do." And then I kind of held on to the reins, really, and it was I went to a place called the Grey. I'd met a guy who came to see me as a seer from California. Dave, I called him. He had a brain tumor. I've met him in a place called the Grey, and it's a place that I had not heard about until I was interviewed by an NDE survivor called Tim Tobias. And I happened to mention to him that everything was a similar color, and I'd met California Dave there. And he said, this place has been described before, Ray. He said, in my 20 years of doing research, he said, you're either the second or the third person who's mentioned this. You know, he said, what was the experience like? And I remember being in a like tiny soul, but you know, when a football game finishes and everybody kind of shuffles out, that's what it felt like. But there was no vivid colors. Everything was different shades of gray, shall we say. So I remember floating up again, and I felt myself become level with Dave's shoulder, and we looked at each other, and I went, "Dave?" And he went, "Ray?" And he said, "What are you doing here?" You know, he went, "You shouldn't be here." So this is the second person who said this to me. I said, "I don't know what I'm doing here, Dave." And as I'm talking to him, I'm still rising. And it's allowed me to have a look out above all of the heads, and to my right I could see the wind, and the wind wasn't like it was in my first experience, beautiful, gorgeous, powerful. It was a carbon black. It looked like razor wire, and it was whipping over people's heads, and as it whipped and cracked, it kind of shattered into these little carbon pieces, like, you know. And I felt myself get to a certain level, and I remember consciously saying to myself, "I'm so happy I'm not stuck here." And the next thing, I was like I passed through something, and now I can feel my nose on the ceiling tiles of the ICU unit, and the little tiny pimples that were within the ceiling tiles, but with this feeling of falling backwards. You know, when you've fallen out of bed, when you've been sleeping, and there's that almost that moment where you're suspended in air until the body kind of goes, you know, what you're waiting for it, like, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
That's exactly where I was, falling back.
Like time stops until you hit the floor.
Yeah. That was that was it. It was a recognizable feeling, and I remember splashing back into my body. It was really, it was like a car crash fit, and with that car crash fit, I could hear the medics going, Ray, it's us. So I had 2 on each arm, 2 on each leg. I was swearing profusely at them, asking them what on earth they beep think they were doing to me, and then gone again. And this went on, you know, for at least an hour, maybe a bit more. And then there was this calmness. It was like the eye of the storm. I see this little face, the Irish woman again, pop her head down. She kind of just looked at me, and I smiled at her, and she said, "It's great to see that smile," you know. And I went. I can't remember what I said to her, but the next thing I know, they've got me in the intensive care unit. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning now. By the time I get out of there, and high on morphine, teeth are cracked ribs. And then it all began again the next morning with the female paramedic came in to see me. She came with a friend, and as she walked towards my bed, I heard her say, "There he is. I can't believe he's still alive." Right. And she came up to me. She told me about the coincidences, the synchronicities of we can't believe that you're still alive. You know, one, you've had an out of hospital cardiac arrest and you survived. She said, but you survived. You know, you're not like the others who we come to. Normally, we'll just come into a dead body. She said, and you know, we've heard about what's happened to you in the ICU unit. She went, you don't know this, but you're really famous in this hospital. And I remember sitting there, and all I this is the God's honest truth, John. All I remember, I had the clicker in my hand, which would allow me to give me more morphine. And as I looked at her, all I've done, I just clicked.
Yeah, you just aged yourself. Okay.
I did. I just thought, I don't know what she's talking about, but I know that I have to have another shot of the morphine, and I thought it'll help with everything, right? You know. And they left, and then another guy turned up called Barry, because in the ICU room, I'd actually sat on my forehead, and that was a peculiar feeling, and I'd watched everyone work up on me, and I felt the clamminess of my forehead on the soles of my feet, and as I sat there haunched, you know, balanced on my forehead, I could see my body slopping from side to side. You know, they was working on me, and then they stopped, and then I heard Barry say something. He said to the rest of the ICU team, "If this doesn't bring him round, nothing will." And I remember turning my head and looking at him and saying to myself, "He doesn't know this is going to hurt." And he hit me with that defibrillator, and oh wow. Poof, yeah, I was back, and I think that was the last one. So he turns up, right, and he's kind of glides to the side of my bed. Well, I perceived him to glide, and he came to the side of my bed, and he looked left and right, and he went, "Mate, you," and I won't swear, but he said, "You are effing bizarre." You know? And he went, "I don't know how."
Thank you.
Yeah, it's like I was just a gog. I was just
what a nice compliment.
It's like, yeah, I mean, I just couldn't get my head around it. And then 4 days later, I get wheeled out. Like, you know, they send me back home, and in a complete daze. The oxygen starvation affected my brain. I couldn't be. I was a gas engineer, had my own business before all of that happened. So that was the end of that. Career was gone. I used to be a truck driver before that. no, we'll take your license off you. If you've had a cardiac arrest, you can't drive trucks anymore.
Oh,
So that was gone. Yeah, a complete change. But I remembered that I was a seer, and I remembered that I was traveling the world, working on horses, working on people. Probably about 2 months before I had my cardiac arrest, I remembered it. I remembered sitting in Santa Barbara, talking to a guy there, a British guy who runs Healing in America. A really cool guy, Roger Ford, and he was telling me you have to get out here, and because I'd actually proven to him that I was a seer. He was telling me something, and I produced this piece of paper and went, "Dum," and he went, and he had like 5 issues on it. So I used to do these party tricks because no one would believe me. Now I send myself emails. I've moved into the future, so I can go back on what I'd seen, because some things I see, it doesn't materialize for maybe 1 or 2 years. And then those who have followed me will know that I'd spent 18 months on a chemo unit. So this is where it brings in one of the Sea sisters. What are you going to do now? Don't know. And but I am a seer. I'm a registered healer, and it allows me to work in this hospital. So I'll rent a room if I have to, just to help others. What do you mean a seer? She said. And I said, well, I told her I come from a family of seers, and I see illnesses and pick up energies, all that kind of stuff. Really hippie-ish, but I'm not hippie. And so she said, well, what do you see? Do you see cancer? Yeah, I do. I've seen cancer quite a lot. So she said, do you see cancer on me? And it was like, wow. Wow.
You gotta love that.
Yeah, you go. Yeah, thanks, man. I said, so there's a lot of caveats. She's not the first person to ask me. There's quite a few. And so I said, are you sure you want to know? She says, yeah. So when I do this thing, I can still talk to you, but I know that I'm in an altered state. And so I told the lady to turn around. She's turned around, she got back to me. I watched this finger come up, and it touched her just below her shoulder blade. So it's here. It's about 3 millimeters in size, but it's asleep. And I said, that's all I've seen. So she turns, face back around me, and looking me square in the eye. But she had this weird look of thunder. I thought I upset her. And, but I remember saying, well, I remember thinking, well, it's no good being upset with me, because I did ask you, whether you wanted me to tell you, and quite a lot. She said, for your information, where your finger was, she said, I had a tumor on the back wall of my lung, which was 70 millimeters in diameter. And the surgeon told me he couldn't get it all out, and the pieces left in there. She said, it's not 3 millimeters, right? I think she said it's 3 point something or another. She said, and that matters because it gets measured, with the MRI scan to see if it's grown. So she said, do you still want to work here? So by that time I was rolling, I said, yeah, I'd love to work here. She said, would you be prepared to work on a chemo unit? Wow. She said, they know about you. They know about what's happened here about you. All right, okay. They know that you're a registered healer. And so she said, we'll set up an interview for you. I had this interview, very informal interview. And actually, one of the nurses who interviewed me, one of the ward sisters from the chemo unit, asked me if she has something, she was going to have a baby. And I said, yeah, you will. I said, but you've got something wrong with your left ovary. And she said, I've just come from the fertility unit, and that's what they told me. And so I guess offered the job, and I go in. I think it's either once or twice a week, and some of the things that some of the things that I've seen, I've seen cancer move from one person to another. I've been barked at by the cancer. On the cardiac sisters, I see it jump from one to another while I was having coffee with them in their office. And I remember thinking, I can't believe I've just seen that. It was like a wisp, like a wisp of smoke. And lo and behold, year and a half down the line, I find out that the other lady, I meet her in a shopping mall, and I've got my head down. She stands in front of me, says, hi, Ray. And I look up. And I know the color of cancer. I just know what it does. It communicates with me. And so she stood in front of me, and I could hear her cancer going, it's Ray, it's Ray, it's Ray, it's Ray. And I just looked up, and I had a drawing in my back pocket. Then we sat down for coffee. And she said, I know. She said, you've seen it. I'm angry with you. You didn't tell me a year and a half ago that, I had cancer. I explained to her why I hadn't said anything. And she said, so where is it then? Like, she knew already. She'd already been diagnosed. It was terminal. I took the piece of paper out, and it was in the exact same spot as the woman she worked with. They'd even taken off the left breast as well. And I was stunned, dumbfounded, and that was the verification of what I had seen had actually happened. And,
Had she left the hospital at that point? Like,
yeah, she couldn't work anymore. And so yeah, lovely. Both of the ladies are beautiful. One is still alive as far as I know, but her other workmate, no. And to see that, it was incredible. But to work on the chemo unit was amazing, just absolutely amazing. The feedback that I got, and this is where I found where my experience came in really, where I was so grateful that it happened. As you said earlier, some of the messages that you get, I get amazing messages. People watch my videos and they get motivation, knowledge, so it's wonderful. But what always used to blow me away was when maybe a patient would come up to me and say, look, I know that I'm going where you've been, so can I have a talk with you? So I did all of this, and then I got asked to come back and give a talk at the hospital that saved my life, and it was on the surviving the psychological effects of surviving a cardiac arrest. And in the audience was another paramedic, and he came up to me after and he said, have you thought about training to be some form of counsellor, to help others who have survived cardiac arrest? No, not really. He went, well, I just happen to have information about, there's a 3-year course here if you want to take it, and I think you'd be good at it. So I did, and I got my qualifications in January, and in counselling and psychotherapy. But my specialised field is death. I don't touch anything else. I don't know about anything else. All I know is what it's like to die. I know the effects that it has upon the families. Many families don't know us anymore. I've got a beautiful sister who helps me an awful lot. I've got a very, very, very understanding girlfriend. She knows a lot. She understands all of this. So it's very difficult. Even I'm starting to think now of getting back into hospitals and speaking to the heart centres. Again, doing meetings. Telling them of how it affects us. Since my cardiac arrest, I've had a further 6 heart attacks, and I've survived them, obviously. But something which I'd noticed was the gap of care for survivors on a psychological level. It's huge. It's just. But the most poignant one is I was asked, could I sit in with a lady who didn't have long to live with the consultant, and so he was. She'd been on chemo and she wasn't really responding, and she got called in for this is a review of where you are and how we see your treatment. And basically the guy started, I couldn't believe it. I was agog. If I was you, I would probably go home. I would label all of your items of who's going to get what. That's what I'm going to tell you. And I looked at her, and she was so strong. And I still remember her to this very day. We left that office and we're walking down this really long corridor to go and meet her husband. Her husband couldn't go in with her, so that was the next thing that she thought, well, ask Ray to come in. So we come out, she's spoken to the consultant. He said, probably 6 weeks. You got probably maybe 6 weeks left. And we're walking down this, as I said, really long corridor. And she's only a tiny lady, but she turned and looked up to me and she said, Ray, will I be able to drive on the other side? And it was such a magical question. It was such an innocent question. It literally blew my socks off. And I thought, how do you answer that?
Can I take a little bit of sand with me from the beach?
Well, yeah, it's like.
I mean,
it was just like.
What do you say?
I know. Do you know what? I struggled for about 10 or 15 seconds, because I knew she wanted an answer off me. And this is where my experience and the pain and all the trauma comes in, because it wasn't all twinkly. It was pretty horrific, to be honest with you, with moments of sheer bliss. And I just kind of said to her, I said, where you're going, you don't need to drive. I said, they'll just give you your wings. And you know what? It was, to me, it was an off the cuff statement, but to her, it was like, and then to amplify what I'd said, when we got to the coffee shop in the hospital, the first thing she said to him was, Raymond's told me that I don't need to worry about driving. I'll get my wings. And that was how profound it was. So, you know, so we offer so much, and it's important to remember, I feel, to offer it on such a humble way, without any egotistical viewpoints, power trips with it, you know, and just, this is how it is, you know, because many are frightened that to come forward if they haven't had a beautiful experience. They're actually thinking that they're not worthy of talking about what happened to them, you know. But you know, I think a lot of us are living in denial over how it affects us. You know, we you know, it's not like that. It's a difficult thing to cope with. I have tried all sorts of ways, and the only way that I cope with this now is to help others, but in a professional manner, which is the way and how I do things now. And to get out to the hospitals, it's not so much on a one-to-one anymore. It needs to start on.
Well, you're working on multiple levels now. I mean, what you're doing, you know, out in the world, and what you're doing here on YouTube, and you know, it's freeing. It's freeing because there's nothing like the feeling of understanding the truth. And when you know that truth, and you know it to be real and not just some sort of concept or belief or faith, right? It's no faith. There's no faith. It's a fact, right? You know it. I know it.
Yes.
Once they know it, it's so freeing. It changes your life entirely.
Yeah, massively. I gave a great, and you know, to back up exactly what you just said. They asked me in 2016, would I come and give a talk to the British Film Festival, and it was in connection with a great animation about death, and it was really cool. I'd never seen anything like that before. So if you know anyone's watching it, check out the British Film Festival, Raymond O'Brien and Professor Chris French. It's a great interview. It's really insightful, because in the audience there's a woman there who, when we was all being asked questions, I explained to her about what you and I just said, and she said she's been walking around like a ghost in the machine for 20 years, and just to sit here and hear, you know, what you have just basically said, and what I have just said, was to her massive. It was huge, to a point where she was now crying, like, and I'm thinking 20 years and she didn't know, like, you know. So how many more of us are out there with
There's so many. On the topic of grief and grieving, what would you say to somebody who's grieving, for example? Would you have any kind of sort of advice or anything to tell them that would maybe make them feel a little better?
I'll come from both angles here. I'll come from the grief of the survivor, and I'll also come back from my experience of loss of somebody very, very, very close, and how I cope with that. I only realized probably about a year ago that I hadn't grieved the loss of who I was. When I lost my business, I lost who I was. You know, it was like for 1 hour I was Raymond O'Brien, the alcohol pothead, and then, you know, when I got home, I wasn't. That was an awful big lesson. Who am I now? But I just carried on. I carried on. I didn't pay any attention. So now I recognize the importance of acknowledging your sense of loss, of who you were, what's changed, how are you going to process that, who am I going to talk to about that, which is the other important side, and who are you going to talk to? Choose very carefully. You know, like yourself, it's you know, it's great that you've experienced what I've experienced, so the person who's coming to you knows that, like, you know, and you know that you know, for you and I, already, just in some of the words with the time that we started talking, I know that you've already understood 100 things about me, and I've already understood 100 things about you, because we've been there, seen it, done it. but those who it's their first time, who are looking for help, or the families who are coming in, for that grief, which I'm going to go into now, is the first thing that I look for is when they come back, is when I get a feeling. It could be like, it doesn't mean it's going to be a voice, but it'll be something. It'll either be a smell, it'll be the essence, it'll be the feeling of something. That's what I'll pick up. I'm not expecting to see, like, the shape of my mother or anything like that. Or sometimes I do hear a voice, so I'm always attuned to that. My mother was my teacher, which is probably the same for all of us. In one shape or form, they will have taught us, unless we were adopted from birth. So they will have taught something. So there's going to be a massive, huge loss there, and understanding that grief too. I understand, which was a great benefit to me, was just because I can't see them doesn't mean they're not there. Nobody's seen me sitting on my forehead looking at the crash team work on me, but I was there. That was my vision. When I spoke to them, they said, yeah, that's exactly what we were doing. So just because we don't see doesn't mean they're not there. It is going to be hard. There is no magic pill for grief. It's a time thing. And again, who we talk to, who we share, what our pains are. Being vulnerable brings power. That's another side of grief. Expressing that, showing that vulnerability of your loss, it brings an immense knowledge and immense learning through being vulnerable. I think it's an important thing to do for ourselves. It's no good doing this all the time. Sometimes you just got to expose yourself and take what's coming and learn from that. So it's death is the driver of life. It pushes us to everything, doesn't it? And it's the fuel of everything, even right down to sorting out your pensions, getting your mortgage. It's all bases on an ending. And the thing that I'd noticed the most when I was on the chemo unit was with that grief was the learning that it brings to me. And I'm sure to yourself. And again, when I'm talking about the grief and how do I cope with it because of my experience, I'd reference what I said earlier. It's we as survivors, I feel, need to give a nod to our own experiences and how it separates us from those who haven't had our experience. As you said earlier, it takes for many of us, it takes away the fear of death. Not everyone. I still have a fear of death. It's like, but it's a different fear of death now. But I had a chance to go back because, and the thing that stopped me going back was I chose the operation. But basically, there was an artery that I had, which was just down to virtually zip. Again, it's where they put the stent in it. The artery had actually collapsed over the front of the stent. And
but your reason for coming back is so much more than that, Raymond. I mean,
yeah, it is. Yeah, and that's
because you've just helped another thousands of people. If
not, but it's still hard, John, and that's and I know you know that. So for all those out there who are thinking the same as me, like I think I just want to say, you ain't alone. You're not alone in that train of thought. Like it's all right to think like that. It's but it's important, as you've just said, to recognize your worth. It's like some of the messages. Now I'm glad that I'm back here because the messages that I've had back and others who have helped, it's been some nights. I just cry because of what I do. Really, it is about helping others, and that is kind of how I've sort of gone on with things. And how? What about you? Do you find it very easy to forgive now?
All the time, even myself, which was the hardest thing, but I can do that now. I had no enemies, love for everybody. I love everything and everybody.
It's the own, and that's what's lovely about having this conversation, because I've not had this conversation on such a level. Can you believe in all the years I've been on this planet? I've always been a little bit, but now as I've gotten older, wisdom comes with age, isn't it? But I do try to stuff as much as I can into each day. That's something that I definitely try to do, and pass on what. As you and I are doing now, you know, for what you and I do now, do you want to be around for another 50, 60, 100 years, or more? And that's really cool. I like that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wish you all the best.
And likewise, man.
Thank you so much. I really wish you the best, and I hope we get to talk again soon.
I'm sure we will. Let me know what you want to, and we'll do it, John.